Hi everyone, and welcome to today's video on this series of tutorials for different actions. Today we will be covering declaration of war together with some actions that are related to it, like for instance call to arms, and also we will be covering the combat, which was something that we were skipping on the last video, since I thought that anyway it would make more sense to cover combat in this particular video, as the declaration of war normally leads to the combat happening. So yeah, without further ado, regarding declaration of war, this is a military action that it will take 1 military power. And the first thing to note is that you pay 1 military power, but you can declare war at multiple realms at once. So the first thing that you do is that you decide which realm or which realms you will be declaring war to. There are a few restrictions. You cannot just declare war at any realm that you wish. So for example, the first one is that you are restricted not to be able to declare war at your allies. So for example, here Wallachia being my ally, I would not be able to declare war at them. The second one is that you cannot declare war at a realm that you have a truce with. So again, Wallachia, I was declaring war last round. I force converted them to Muslim, so I have a truce with them during this round, so I wouldn't be able to declare war at them with that truce that happens to be in their capital. You cannot also declare war at player realms who have already passed. This is quite an important concept, because sometimes you will find yourself in a situation where you are threatened by another player that seems like he's preparing to declare war on you, and you've already taken your event, so deciding to pass preemptively would be a reasonable choice if you want to hold your territories. Something that in the game we haven't seen it yet, but something that happens in the game is the power struggles, where you are scoring victory points for holding particular territories. And if you, for instance, find yourself in a situation where you have a good amount of prestige, but you are a bit weak at that moment compared to your neighbors, passing to prevent them from declaring war at you could be a really good idea. Then the next restriction, the fourth one, would be declaring war at a non-player realm that is allied to another player, and that player either has passed or that you have a truce with them. So let's say you cannot skip the fact that they have passed or that you had a truce with them by declaring war at their NPR ally. So that's a bit of a safe clause. And then on a similar situation, you cannot declare war at the Holy Roman realm that the emperor has either passed, or that the emperor, for instance, you have a truce with them, or that the emperor is your ally. So main difference between these two that we've just checked: when the NPR is allied to your ally, you can declare war at it. But if it is an NPR member of the Holy Roman Empire, then you cannot declare war at him if the emperor is your ally. So those are two different things that have to be understood. So you cannot bypass an alliance with the emperor by declaring war at a Holy Roman member. It's forbidden. But you can bypass an alliance with another player by declaring war at one of their NPR allies. The last two have to do with distant realms, so quite simple. Basically, you cannot declare war at a distant realm that you have not discovered. So for instance, here France placed a claim in Benin, meaning that now they have discovered Benin and they can declare war at them without any problem. But you wouldn't be able, for example, to declare war to any of the realms in India when you just haven't placed any claims around and you don't know about them. And then the final one is that you cannot declare war when you are an interregnum, so meaning when you don't have any ruler. All of this information can be also found at the back of the player aid. So basically here at the bottom you have the you may not declare war, and then the exceptions of those is that if the ally that we were saying you cannot declare war at an ally, if it has a marriage on the disputed side, that would actually allow you to declare war on an ally. So that's one of the few exceptions in the game in which two players that are allied can end up at war directly. So if they have a disputed succession, you would be able to just declare war at them. Then here you have an exception that says if you're accepting a defensive call to arms, ignore all. So basically, if you are protecting your NPR ally, so that would come with the example that we were saying about exception D. So that normally you can declare war at an NPR ally. That would be maybe putting you at odds against a player that is your ally currently. So this is why you can accept a defensive call to arms, meaning that two players that are allied between them could end up at war if one of them declares war at the NPR ally of the second player. So that's why. And then of course events, which we will check perhaps in another video. Events will sometimes give you an exception that allows you to then declare war at other players or remove truces or so on. So, but events, normally those are self-explanatory, and if there is such exception, they will let you know. So once we've seen that, we already know that normally we cannot declare war at our allies, except if there is a disputed succession on them. You cannot declare war at realms that have a truce. So once we already know all of that, the second part, once we've determined the realm that we will declare war at, is to see if there is any CV that we can apply. Basically, in this time period, you couldn't just declare war at any realm without any justified reason. So you will need to have a casus belli in order to declare war without any penalties. Otherwise, you would lose 2 stability if you would declare war with no CB. And if the target would have a marriage with you, you would also lose another stability. There are multiple casus belli in the game. The most common one is that you get from your claims. So having a claim on a particular realm will give you a casus belli against it. And this is the easiest one also to get, since you can always fabricate a claim, as we saw in another video, and use that as a casus belli for the war. There are many other casus belli that you can have. For example, what we were saying about a realm having a disputed succession, it would allow you to basically declare war on them. Or if you're a Catholic and the other realm is also a Catholic one, and they have an excommunicated ruler, you could also declare war at them. The Emperor, for example, they have a casus belli against any occupants of the empire. So if any player has a town within the Holy Roman Empire borders, for example here France, Austria would have a casus belli to declare war on them because of that, for imperial liberation. And then there are some ideas, like for example Deus Vult, that will give you additional casus belli, holy war against realms of a different religion than yours or distant realms. So once we've selected which realms we want to declare war on, we have to check if there are any casus belli that applies. Otherwise, we would lose stability. So as a general, let's say, rule of thumb, you will always try to find a casus belli, whether it is by fabricating a claim, for example, or by the use of some excommunications or some disputed successions or some ideas like Deus Vult, before you're going to be declaring war. There can be situations in which you decide to declare war because there is an open window, specific moment of opportunity to strike at an enemy that is not expecting you to do that, and you will just take the penalty of 2 stability just to do so. So once both players are already aware, once you are already aware of who the enemy will be, the next step is the call to arms. So starting by the aggressor, you can call to arms your allies. So let's say that me as the Ottomans, I'm going to declare war, and I'm going to be choosing to use my claim that I have here in Moldavia to declare war at Poland. So the next thing, once we know that I have a casus belli and I don't lose any stability, is that I can call to arms my allies. So this is the main reason why you are also making allies, because you can then call them to arms and they will assist you and provide you resources to help you in the war. So in order to be able to call to arms an ally, you first of all need to have 2 influence in them. So if it's an offensive call to arms, as this is the case, you would have to spend both influence in order to flip their token to the active ally side. Whenever you are calling to arms a realm, that realm needs to be at peace. So you cannot call to arms a realm that already is at war. And that realm needs to be either adjacent to yourself or to the new enemy that you are declaring war on to. So for instance, in this case, Wallachia was adjacent to both of us, so I would be able to call them to arms. Here, for instance, I have Karakoyunlu, that they are also my ally, and I would also be able to spend the 2 influence from them in order to call them to arms, because they are also adjacent to me. For each ally that you call to arms, if those allies are adjacent to your enemy, you would receive 1 military power. So in this case, Wallachia would grant me 1 military power. But Karakoyunlu, not being adjacent to Poland, would not grant me any military power. So I would get 1 military power for calling Wallachia to arms. Then you would calculate the tax income of that ally. So for example, here Wallachia has 2 small provinces, meaning that they have a tax value of 2. And you would have that amount to know how many units they would provide you with. And the maximum is always 5. So even if you ally a really large realm, let's say here we have the Mamluks that are quite large, they would still only give me 5, even if they have way more than 10 tax income. So in this case, Wallachia would grant me 1 unit, and then Karakoyunlu, they would grant me, they have 6, 7, so they would grant me 8. So they would grant me 4, because you also take into account their vassals. So that means that I would get 5 units. And these units could be placed in your available manpower, which would be able to be recruited with the recruit action that we were seeing the other day, as infantry for free or as cavalry, just paying 3 ducats. So once the aggressor has decided which realms they want to call to arms, then the defender would have the same choice. In this case, in this situation, Poland didn't have any allies to call to arms. Also note that the restrictions and the additional units and the military power is only granted from call to arms that you do to non-player realms. With player realms, you can call any player realm for free. You don't have to spend any influence or anything, and they don't have to be adjacent. It's up to you. The only difference with defensive call to arms is that instead of spending both influence, you would need to just discard 1. So basically, it's a bit cheaper to call to arms your allies if you are defending. Here I would also would have been able to call to arms Naples if I would have wanted, but also this comes down already to strategy. Since we were saying you only get military power if the realm that you're calling is adjacent to another player. So for instance, in this war against Poland, I would decide, for example, to call to arms Wallachia because of the extra military power. And I'm gonna call to arms Karakoyunlu because anyway they are not adjacent to anybody else, so maybe I will use those allied units right away. But I could hold calling Naples because if there is a conflict, let's say Spain decides to then attack me, seeing that I am here distracted with Poland, I could wait for Naples to be called to arms later and grant me the military power by calling them to arms against Castile, who would be adjacent, and also spend just 1 influence instead of 2. So once we've called to arms the allies, both of us would have the same chance to do so. Then the player that either is declared war upon or whose NPR ally was declared war upon and they come and they were called to arms, they would win 1 military power. So here they don't have any, but let's say that we would then move it. And then what we are is removing any influence that we had in that realm. So again, this is not the situation in this case, but let's say that I had, for whatever reason, some influence here in Wielkopolska. So because I declare war at Poland, I would remove the influence from Poland areas. Important to note that if, for example, I declare war at Poland and they call to arms other realms, I would not remove the influence from those other NPR allies or player allies that they call to arms, just from the target that you've declared war. Once war is declared and both the aggressor and the defender have called to arms their respective allies, we first check if there is any battle happening. So for that we would check if there are units of two realms at war with each other in the same spaces, whether it is in a sea zone or in a land area. And in case of the NPR realms, what we are checking is if there are enemy units in their areas, in which case they would spawn units and they would defend against them, unless they already had some hostile units in that area. So that's how the NPRs work, that normally they just spawn units in their areas and try to defend. Or if there would be NPR ports, let's say that here Moldavia was an independent realm and they were an ally of Poland, and Poland did call them to arms because they had one influence to spend. So automatically, not only there would be land combat happening if I were to have any units in Moldavia, but also because they have a port facing the sea here in the Black Sea, there would be first a naval battle against my ships in the Black Sea, which would remove them from the trade protection slots. And then if I had any units in Moldavia, a battle would happen. So we will now check combat quite quickly using this as an example. So let's say that this was the situation. First, we resolve the naval battle. So there will be one ship coming out from that port that will fight against my fleet. Here I have already quite a huge number of ships. I have 4 galleys, I have 3 light ships, and they have only 1. In naval combat, you roll 3 of these artillery dice, and you are looking for artillery results in order to inflict a hit on your opponent. The aggressor first, and then the defender would be able to, if they don't have one, appoint an admiral that basically will add additional dice. So for example, because I have here Hayerdin, it's a hard one, then I would roll additional 3 dice. Non-player realms, they do not appoint leaders normally, but if there would be 3 or more units of an NPR, they would then draw 1 military card to check if they have any leader in it. So for example, if they would have drawn this one because they had 3 units or more, they would have added those dice to their dice pool. That's how they work. And then it's quite simple, just roll the dice. For each artillery that you get, you can inflict a hit for each ship that you have. So having 3 artillery results, that means that 3 of my galleys would be able to assign 1 hit. If you ever roll more results than you have, so let's say that I rolled 6 artillery, and let's ignore that I had those extra 3 light ships. Even though I rolled 6 artillery results, since I only have 4 units to assign those hits with, I would only inflict 4 hits to my opponent. Then the enemy would roll the same, 3 dice, and they would apply hits accordingly. Let's imagine that actually my roll was the one that they just rolled, and that they rolled this one. They would inflict 1 casualty on me, because even if they roll 3 dice, they only have 1 unit, and I would inflict only 1 casualty on them. However, during the last round of combat, when you are having a naval combat, if you roll a pair of tercios, you can then steal one of the ships that you've just defeated. So in this situation, again imagining that I don't have the light ships, or imagining that they are, doesn't matter, they would inflict me a hit, so I would lose one of my galleys, which I would put in my supply. But because I steal one of the ships, I would remove the NPR ship, which is always treated as a light ship, and I would be able then to place 1 myself. Then we would follow that up with, because I won a combat, the first time that you win a combat during your round, no matter if it is a naval combat or a land combat, you would gain 1 military power. Since I don't have, I would be able to move one from another type, or just take one influence from the map or whatever. And then here it would be the same. There are 2 units that are spawning and defending against me, but note that whenever a realm is an active ally, they halved how many units will come to the assistance. So in this case there are 2 tax provinces in total, but only 1 unit would come out. And just like we were seeing, you again roll 3 dice. However, for land combat, the base is these infantry dice, and the non-player realm by default will only roll 3 as well. But again, if they would have 3 or more units, they would draw a card from the military deck. And here you are rolling dice, and you are again assigning it to your army. So I think this was army 1. Yep. So in army 1, as you can see, I have quite a good balanced army composition. I have some infantry, some cavalry, and some artillery. So that means that I would be able to assign all of my hits. In order to be able to assign the silhouette, you need that many units of that type. So here 1 cavalry would assign with this would be infantry. And this die is a bit specific in land combat, because if you have the tertios or Janissaries idea, you count actually that this die would be able to apply 2 hits. So in total, realistically speaking, I've rolled 3 hits, but I only have 2 infantry to assign it to, because even though this is 1 die, as it has 2 silhouettes, it looks for 2 infantry to apply both hits. So in this case, I would be able to apply 3 hits on my opponent. And then the NPR, all of her units count as infantry, so this would be actually a complete miss. They wouldn't do any units on me, any hits on me. For any hit that you receive, you have to assign those casualties within your army, and you are free to choose if you want to remove your infantry, your cavalry, your artillery. It doesn't matter. So let's say here I could just lose one of my infantry. What matters is that if you have already, let's say, allied units, if you have then some mercenaries in your army, when you're taking casualties, you have to start by a mercenary unit, followed by any of your units, and then you last would take allied units. And you repeat that cycle for as many hits as you have. So let's say if I got 6 hits, the first one would be a mercenary, the second one would be one of my units, then it would be an allied unit, and then the other 3, because I don't have any of the other 2 types. So you just cycle through the casualties taken, and this cycle of casualties is reset every combat round. So if, for instance, in the first combat round I only receive 2 hits, the first hit would be applied to the mercenary and the second hit to my unit. And then on the second round, if I only receive 1 hit, we would not continue by the allied unit, we would reset the cycle, and then that means that the next hit is applied to the infantry from my manpower. So that's how combat looks like. If I were to win the land combat on top of the naval combat, I would not receive another military power, because as I was saying, you only receive 1 military power per the first victory that you have in a round. Also to say is that during combat you can use combat cards. Combat cards are marked with a flame. So for example, this would be a combat action. You would be able to spend 1 military power to gain 4 dice of your choice. Whenever you gain dice from cards, those last for the entire round, not just for 1 battle round, for the entire combat, sorry. There are other cards that have the flame here at the top, the same. You can just get additional dices, or re-roll some dice by taking a wound on your general. So you can always use battle cards if you wish, and you have the military power to pay for that. So once we've checked if any naval combat and land combat happens, the last thing that can happen in a war, so let's imagine that this actually was not like that. We'll put this back as it was. If no combat would have taken place because of the declaration of war, that actually didn't place the token, but the aggressor should always place the token on the capital of the defender. So let's say that there was no combat happening. The last step is that if no combat happens because of the declaration of war, then the player who declares war can choose to take either an activate units or a recruit units action, and they don't have to pay any additional military power for that. So for instance, I would be able then to recruit my allied units and some extra units into my army to try to attack, or I would be able to activate units, meaning that I could activate my units and move them into a hostile area. Remember, I'm not sure if I said it, I think that's something that I missed in the previous video, but when you're activating, if you enter into an hostile or into a neutral area, you have to always stop your movement. Or you could, if you already were for whatever reason in an area with enemy provinces, you would be able also to use the activate action to siege. The free siege, what it means is that the first unit that you activate would be for free. So for example, let's say that here I could activate for free my artillery and occupy 2 of the provinces. And if I wanted to still activate more units, so let's say this infantry, for that one I would have to spend already 1 military power. So yeah, and then once that's done, that would be your turn. So if a combat happens, you don't get any free activation. If no combat happens, you do get a free activation. So with combat, that pretty much sums it up. There will be more exceptions if you come into, I don't know, specific cards that perhaps will grant you some extra dice in combat, or some specific attack before the combat, like Noble Knights for instance, or some action cards that can allow you to gain extra dice or retreat from combat or intercept somebody. There are many different combinations that I don't think I will be covering here, and I think that pretty much covers up the few actions that were left from the last day, that those were declaration of war and checking the combat, and also explain how the call to arms work. Possibly in another video I may cover a bit the peace treaties, but that will be all for today. So yeah, thanks once again for watching the video, and I will see you in the next one. Take care.